Okay, we will now convene our regular city council study session for May the 30th. The first item on this agenda is to review the agenda for our Monday, June the 3rd regular council meeting. Council, let's please refer to that document. I note that currently there is nothing off of the consent agenda for this meeting on the 3rd. Council, any items on here that you'd like to get a presentation on or have any questions on? While you're thinking about that, I did note, Mr. Brady, that we are, item 5L is the continuation of the Mesa Drive improvement project that we started a few years ago and took a deep breath, and now we're restarting again. Yes. So, this is all bonds that were approved several years ago. But I thought it might be good for us to know what are this is going to be obviously somewhat disruptive of traffic in a congested downtown part of Mesa. Do we know what the dates are for beginning and hopefully the ending of this project?
We'll give you the beginning.
Okay. That's right.
Well, Mayor, no pain, no gain, I guess,
That's
right? Mesa Drive, it'll start at 8th and work its way all the way to Main. We aren't adding any lanes, but we're redoing all the pavement, water, gas. We are undergrounding power south of Broadway and undergrounding the power line crossings north of Broadway. It's City Electric in those areas. We are going to start sometime in the first part of July. I don't have an exact date yet because they have to get us their signed contracts and bonds and insurance before we can begin. So sometime around the first part of July, we're anticipating an 18-month project. I will tell you that Mesa Drive is one of our more mature streets, and we find when we get into mature streets that there are things there we don't know about that do create delays from time to time. So I do kind of warn people of that. We are starting in the intersection of Mesa Drive and Broadway. We'll be starting with the utility work there, and we'll be starting on the northeast quadrant, working our way kind of counterclockwise around, completing utilities, doing some lane shifts as we do that. And most of the work on the utilities will be completed at night in the intersection at Broadway. We're trying to minimize it. We'll be also putting in the temporary span wire signals so it's a little clearer as we shift traffic through that intersection. So that's the current plan, and that's what we're proceeding ahead with.
So, Mayor, Council, also, this is an example when we talk about how we look at our CIP. We don't look at this as just a street project, or in this case, it's really a regional street project because there are funds that are coming from Prop 400 as a regional project. So when we look at projects, street projects, and I think we've been trying to explain this to the council, but this is how we do capital improvements in the city of Mesa, and it's served us well. And in particular, when we're doing it in the inner city, you're going to see that this project, and Beth kind of just mentioned it, but sometimes I think we say it, but we don't emphasize the point. This is more than just a street project.
It is.
This is a gas project. This is a water project. This is a wastewater project. And this is an electric project. So this has everything in it. So when we say, oh, we're doing Mesa Drive, well, it's more than just the reconstruction of Mesa Drive. It is looking at the gas utility, the electric utility, the water utility, and the wastewater utility. Because this way we're recognizing that when we go in and make this kind of investment on the street, we really need to take care of and address the infrastructure underneath it now. We really try to avoid having to go back and tear up new streets. And so there's kind of this assessment of the utilities and how old are they really, and whether or not we should, how much longer are they going to last, and all that. So, but these street projects often do drive what happens in our infrastructure, our utility infrastructure replacement program. And then Beth also explained, we talk about this being a Mesa Drive project, which it is, but there's two major intersections that I can think of where you're not just doing, linearly right up Mesa Drive, but talk about where you're kind of going beyond that scope to kind of tie in the intersections.
So actually there'll be more work on Broadway, east and west. Broadway actually will go to Wilbur on the west, and LeSueur on the east, and we'll be doing some utility work in there too. Mr. Brady mentioned all the utilities. There is some storm drain work in this, and there is some on Broadway as well that we'll be doing in that area. On First, which is another one of the intersections we cross, we have another project that we'll be addressing first on east and west of Mesa Drive. However, Mesa Drive is going to what we call the curb returns, where the curbs come back and stop, with the exception on the west side and the northwest corner. We're going to be doing some curb sidewalk improvements in that area all the way to Pomeroy on the west in that area. So, and then another project will come in and pick up the First Avenue improvements later this year.
Just one more thing, because there's been some discussion, I think, let me just go back to this. There's been some discussion about what's happening on First Avenue
From
East.
LeSueur to
Yeah, oh, sorry, LeSueur.
LeSueur
Well, to LeSueur from,
to Mesa Drive.
yeah, and we've tried to figure out ways to, as we're coming in and doing a project like this, to try to pick up some of those costs and work with adjacent properties on it. So you're going to see some of that coming also at a future date also. So the point is, when we're in there interrupting and tearing up streets, we're really looking at the other opportunities. We know that those intersections, so those side streets that are going to be, that need to be improved also, they're trying to address those at the same time. So we're not building a new street, then coming up and having to tear up adjacent streets right next to it. It's a painful process in extending the disruption, but we get it all done, and then we get out of there. So.
Mr. Luna?
Just a real quick question, Beth. I'm assuming that you're going to lay conduit for placement of dark fiber throughout, since you're going to be tearing the street.
Yes, Mayor, Councilmember Luna, we are doing quad ducts up and down these areas as we do them, and we're working with our ITD group and our transportation groups on those. We've also been working with Cox and CenturyLink to underground their lines and try to get them to put in spirit ducts where we can as well. So it's why these projects take a while to get to construction, is that we have a tremendous amount of coordination we do with all utilities, private and public, to make sure we're getting stuff in that we need in. The last thing we want to do is cut brand new pavement. It doesn't make me popular.
Yeah. Great. Okay.
Thank you. Jen?
I just have a few questions. When did you say the construction was going to start?
Probably in July, and it's an 18-month construction period, and we are starting at the intersection of Broadway
Are you
with
starting at
utilities.
Broadway?
Yes. And I think we've provided, I can get you a more detailed description if you'd like, for your Facebook or website or whatever you want.
Yes, I would like to post it on Facebook. And then I assume you'll notice the street as far as, digital display or somehow
We do.
notice at least a few
Yes, we
weeks
do.
before.
We do.
So that people will start thinking about how they're going to ride around it. And then I assume you'll also notify the businesses, especially those
do.
at Mesa Drive and Broadway.
We do.
Okay.
We do. I have a fairly proactive, they're small but mighty PR
Yeah.
group that
Yes.
does
We've
this.
already had a lot of conversations.
We have.
Those property owners especially.
That corner.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to let them know it's actually
Sure.
starting.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that a lot of folks have commented on the transition of beautiful new pavement on Mesa Drive, and then all of a
Yeah,
sudden
that's
going
true.
to four-wheel drive to get through the rest of it. So I think we're looking forward to the improvements here.
So I had one more question. If we start at Mesa Drive and Broadway, and then as far as the street improvements, are you going to start going south or north, since the improvement is from 8th Avenue to Main?
We'll be going south first because the electrical undergrounding, we've got more electrical undergrounding to the south and then north. And the paving is really the last thing. When you do projects like this, you're doing mostly underground for quite a bit of the first part of the project, so people don't see the progress until the paving starts. But the paving will be in the last few months of the project, really.
And how long is the project? Is it 8 months, or do we have some kind of
In terms
duration?
of utilities or the whole
The
project?
whole thing?
18 months.
18 months.
18 months. This
Okay,
is about
18 months.
$24 million in work, so it's a substantial project.
Okay, all right, note to self, avoid Mesa Drive. Okay, thanks.
Alternative routes.
Just out of curiosity, this part of Mesa obviously goes back over 100 years. Do we anticipate, I mean, what's the age of the infrastructure that's down there right now?
Beth's going to find out.
Yeah.
Okay. Kind of an
Actually-
archaeological project.
Yeah, but most of this infrastructure is well over 30 years old now today. So as we get in there, we're going to find things we didn't know were in there and that there's no records of. So it's pretty typical in our more mature streets that we find this stuff. In some of our streets, in the last project, we actually found some concrete structures under the intersection of Mesa Drive and Southern. I don't know whether they're part of an old storm drain system or what. So we find interesting things in our projects. So.
All right. Well, thank you. Appreciate the update. Council, other questions for the agenda for Monday's agenda? Okay. Thank you. The next item on the agenda for this meeting then is item 2, to acknowledge receipt of various boards and minutes. Is there a motion to that effect?
Do we have a special meeting?
Oh, I'm sorry.
And then, Mayor, maybe before we jump to that one, if you don't mind. Ryan, what number is it?
Do we? Did we already do those?
We have to have a special meeting for the budget, Mayor, as it's just required for us to have a separate meeting from the council meeting on the
Yes.
same night, so.
Okay.
So there's that agenda. And then for item, I guess, 1A, we do have a presentation we want to just share with you regarding the secondary property tax levy.
Okay. Is that in this meeting or in the meeting?
Yeah, no, we could do it right now.
Okay.
We're ready to do that if you'd like.
Okay.
Ryan?
Council, does that sound okay?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Let's do that.
Good morning, Mayor Giles, members of the council. I'm Ryan Wimmer. I'm the city treasurer. I'm here to talk about the city's proposed secondary property tax for the year that's coming, fiscal year 1920. So where does a Mesa resident's property tax dollar go? As you can see in this graphic, the vast majority of our property tax dollar goes to public school districts, which for most of the city's Mesa Public Schools, but also includes Higley Schools, Tempe, Queen Creek, and Tempe school districts.
Gilbert?
Oh, did I not? Did I?
Yeah.
Okay,
There's
Gilbert,
a few of
thank
us
you.
that are paying into the Gilberts.
Yeah. Right. So as you can see, there are other recipients of a Mesa property tax dollar, but going to Mesa it's actually a little less than 9% of the city's, of the residents' property tax dollar comes to the city of Mesa. And that's just to give context as we talk about this, the relative size of the city's property tax levy versus the other jurisdictions that Mesa residents pay to. So as we've talked about a little bit recently, there are two property tax types. Primary, which can be used and really can be used for pretty much anything, but the general operations of the city, running parks, libraries, public safety. The city does not have a primary property tax. The other type of property tax is secondary property tax, which can only be used, it's legally restricted to be used on debt service on general obligation bonds that are approved by voters for a specific purpose, like constructing parks or buildings or other generally infrastructure purposes. And the magic formula for property tax is down there at the bottom. It's really key to keeping this all straight in your head is that to determine property tax, it's a property's value times the tax rate, which is set by the council, by a governing body. That formula equals the tax levy. So the value times the rate equals the levy. And the levy could also be thought of as the bill. So the value times the rate equals the bill or the levy. Property values continue to increase. This chart shows values for the last 10 years. Each property has two values, and those are the blue values called the full cash value, and the green value is the limited property value. The green value is the value that's used for taxes, It's the basis for calculating your taxable value on a property. And you can see the blue is obviously increased fairly rapidly in recent years, and that corresponds with the run-up in the real estate market. You can see the green not increasing but slowly, and that's because that value is limited to grow by 5% a year. And the intent of that is so that when values are increasing rapidly, property owners' tax bills aren't increasing rapidly with their value. It slows down that rate of growth. Eventually, they should come together, but it limits that impact to the property owner of having their values increasing rapidly. Well, and I also want to point out before we move on, that gap between the two means that the taxable value of city property should continue to increase for several years until the two come together. So the taxable value is called the net assessed value, and it's derived from that limited value that we saw on the last slide. And this is the amount that actually gets taxed. You can see from last year to this year, it increased by 7%. It's interesting to note that 4% of that increase was due to appreciation of existing property, but it's important to this conversation to note that new property, so that's construction of houses, buildings, new equipment, major equipment, that accounts for 3% of that year-to-year growth. So that growth of new property, there's no new land being created, right? But it's new infrastructure being built. That broadens the tax base and it spreads out the impact of the tax levy. So that'll come into play later. And at the bottom, you see that the formula again. This is the value portion of that formula, property value. So new property of 3% growth. As you recall, in November of 2018, voters passed 2 general obligation bond authorizations, one for parks and culture and one for public safety. And so we're going to note the impact of that in this discussion. When we talk about the impact of the property tax, we normally put it in terms of the annual impact to a median valued residential property, so the median homeowner, we refer to it as. The current levy today, this year, before the current levy from this past year, the year we're in, the impact to the average homeowner is $129. In the election pamphlet in November, we included a line with the median valued property, residential property, so that voters, when they got that pamphlet, would be able to see the impact to that value, and it was $50. That was the estimate included in the pamphlet. So
$50 is related to the $196 million.
Yes.
So all those, if what they were to vote for the 2 initiatives, then the impact to the median homeowner was anticipated to be about $50.
Exactly.
More additional for the year.
Exactly. So yeah, the pamphlet, the purpose of the pamphlet is to help voters understand what the impact would be. So the $196 million in bonds, the estimate to the median valued home was $50. So you could reasonably anticipate that if the existing levy was $129 and the new bonds would result in a $50 increase, that the total anticipated levy for next year, in fiscal year 1920, would be $179. So just to look at that annual impact for next year, for fiscal year 1920, that first column there is the same information we just saw on the last slide. The $129 for prior authorizations so that's the current levy. Those are all for prior authorizations. So you have the $129 and then the $50 estimate that was included in the pamphlet for a total of $179. There were a couple of good things that are happening between this year and next year. One is that property values increased, as we saw on the prior slide. With new property, the impact of new property and the tax base broadening, it has an impact on the on the median home value, reducing that impact by $3 because that cost is spread out over that new property as well. Also, there's additional savings, if you see in that third column, from prior issuances of $19 per median homeowner because of savings in prior issuances. And we'll talk about what that's from in just a minute. But if you look at the net impact on the rightmost column, the proposed levy for 1920, that $50 impact that was estimated in the pamphlet is the same. That didn't change. But because of this savings, the new property and the savings from prior issuances, the existing levy from prior authorizations is able to be reduced from $129 to $107, and the total down from $179 to $157. So in summary, the anticipated impact for next year was $179 to the median homeowner. The actual proposed levy is going to be $157. So $22 less than what was expected or anticipated. Now, why was there savings from prior issuances? We make a lot of assumptions when we set the property tax rate, and obviously we try to be conservative in those assumptions. So number one, interest rates have been lower than assumed. Interest rates have stayed at although they're higher than they were a few years ago, they're at historically low levels, which saves us when we sell debt. It's cheaper. The collection rate on property tax has been higher than we've assumed. We assume a delinquency factor, which we've exceeded. And then number three, the savings from those first two items were used to structure new issuances to pay more principal in the early years. So by paying principal in the early years, more principal in the early years, you save in interest costs over the life of the bonds. And that has an overall kind of a snowball effect. So what is the proposed rate and levy for 1920? You see it in the rightmost column there, $41.7 million levy and $1.18 rate. And that is an increase from the current levy and rate, but substantially less than the anticipated levy and rate that was anticipated with the bond election. Just for context, this is the 5-year view of the history of the levy and the rate. You see the levy in the blue bars there, and the proposed increase or the proposed adjustment this year, as well as to the rate, which has been declining in recent years because of new property coming on the rolls and is adjusted this year upwards.
So, Mayor and Council, one of our philosophies is as we structure debt, we try to maintain a fairly level tax levy throughout the period. Obviously, when we have a new bond election, a new authorization, we have to adjust that. But even the numbers you have, so you can see the prior 4 years, how we try to be very careful about maintaining a level amount of tax levy of what we're going to have to pay each year. What happens is during those times, because we may sell the bonds at lower than expected rates, I guess that's probably the main factor, or changes in the assessment, then our rates can actually be dropped, but we're still maintaining the levy. So that's the key. We allow the rate to drop, but we're not adjusting the levy. We try to maintain that to be the same. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, Mayor Chris, the one caveat I'd add is that the reason the rate drops is because property values are increasing.
Right.
So to generate the same levy,
we can drop the rate. So the rate, if the values go up, which they do, which they have been, and you can see they will, we don't need the same rate to generate the same levy. And so we're able to drop the rate. But we always remind everyone what we're trying to maintain is how much you pay, the bill. We're trying to keep that level. So if your home value goes up, we're going to drop the rate so you're not paying more in your tax bill. We're trying to maintain that to be level. Now, with the new authorization, we're having to adjust the total amount that we have to pay for debt, and that's what you see on that last column with a little adjustment in the rate. But the good news was because of increasing values in the existing property values as well as new construction, we didn't have to go up as high as we had anticipated or what we had conveyed to the voters. So we're hoping, again, as we go through the next few years with this authorization, we'll see additional growth in the tax base. It's hard to speak to the economy as far as interest rates, but we'll try to keep those low. But as you saw, because of our good rating that we received in the market responded very well, and we got a very competitive interest rates. On the GEO side, what was the interest rate that we got this last time?
2.7.
Yeah, so less than 3% interest on our bond. So we're not going to pledge we can get that every year, but it shows you that our cost of debt, we've tried to keep that as low as possible.
And Mayor Chris, one other point I'd add is that if you see the proposed tax rate in 1920, it's actually lower than the tax rate was in 15-16. So with that decline, and then it creates some capacity in the rate for the current adjustment. So the remaining calendar for the property tax levy and the budget is that on June 3rd, on Monday, in the special meeting, you'll be you'll be holding a public hearing on the budget and the tax levy, and then you'll be considering final adoption of the annual budget. And then 2 weeks later, which is the amount prescribed in statute, you'll consider adoption of the final or of the secondary property tax levy. Thank you, Mayor. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate the good news.
I think the attorney just made a really good observation. For $196 million is what we anticipate, that's what the authorization will be over the next few years. It's only going to, instead of costing $50 for the average homeowner, it's going to be $28.
Right. So 50 minus 22, it would be 28. Yep.
So you think about what we're going to be able to do with $196 million worth of improvements across the city. And the median homeowner is going to be impacted by about $28. It's $28 a year.
Yes.
Correct?
Right.
So, and we'll work to do everything we can to keep that low and to make sure these improvements create great value for the community. So I think that's a pretty good deal.
Agreed. Thank you. Jen.
I have one question. I know that the secondary property tax rate has been falling due to rising valuations and additional property. So what was it last year? Was it like 2.5% or something like that? And what is it and for this proposed, as far as percentage? I know we have dollars here, but I was curious on percentages.
It's a good question, Mayor. Councilmember Duff. The change in, and there's several different values to talk about, but the full cash value, which is unconstrained, increased 9.9%, so 10%. And this, keep in mind, there's a lag of a couple years. So this is more reflective of what was happening 2 or 3 years ago in the market. But sorry, you asked about last year as well. But last year it was 8%. This year it's 10% for the full cash value. The limited, which is limited for the existing property to 5% a year, so that's what's actually taxable, was 5.6% last year and 7.1% this year. So we're still recognizing kind of more of the boom in the market from a couple years ago in these values.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Freeman, do you have any questions?
No, I don't. I've been listening. Thank you very much, Ryan. Appreciate the presentation.
Thank you. Frankie.
Just a question. What's the medium house homeowner cost as far as raw figure?
Mayor, Councilmember Heredia,
The home value, yes.
yeah, Mayor, Councilmember, the limited value, so that's the taxable value, is $132,000. And that seems very low, and it is, but that translates to a median sale value of $228,000.
So you get those little cards from the tax assessor, it'll have those two values on it. One is more your market value. What do you call it? The higher value is the...
Well, and let me clarify, Mayor, Chris, so there's actually the two values on your tax card are going to be the limited value and the full cash value. And those values, well, and the value I cited, Let me back up for a second. The full cash value sounds like the full value of a property, but it's not. It's a certain ratio below the comparable sale value. So I talk about a third value, which is the sale value, which is the actual value you would expect to get in the market. It's pretty convoluted the way it's set up, but they do that for reasons that make sense. But the three values then would be the limited value, which is $132,000, the full cash value, which is $187,000, and the sale value, which is $228,000.
But the tax only applies to the lowest one.
Tax applies to $132,000.
But we're not saying that we think the median home value is worth $132,000 in Mesa, Arizona. That's just that's a calculated number that's used by the appraiser.
Right.
Thank you. Other questions, council? All right, so this will be a special council meeting on Monday night immediately after the regular council meeting, correct? All right, thank you very much. The next agenda item for today then is item 2, that's to acknowledge receipts of various boards and board minutes. Is there a motion to that effect? Thank you, Mr. Luna and Mr. Thompson. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Mr. Freeman, did you vote?
I did, aye.
Thank you. Any opposed? All right, that item passes. Next item on this agenda then is to hear reports on meetings and conferences attended. Anything you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, real quick, Councilmember Duff and I attended the United States Global Leadership luncheon yesterday. It was quite informative with Senator Sinema, and then we had a 4-star, 5-star retired general and an ambassador, and talked about the impact of working with countries throughout the world and investments, and why it's important that the United States continue doing that. So it was very, very informative. It was a great presentation.
Very good. Other meetings or conferences? If none, I think we do need to acknowledge a sad event. We had the passing yesterday of a good friend of the city of Mesa, former council member, former Assistant Police Chief Mike Whalen. Has been bravely battling cancer for several months now. So that we all feel a great loss there, and certainly express our condolences to Mike's family. And I know there's a lot of people that Mike will be very sorely missed, and we really appreciate the amazing service that he gave throughout his adult professional life to our city in so many ways. So we wish him and his family well. Other comments, council? If not, Mr. Brady, what's our schedule look like?
We'll see you on Monday, Mayor, for our council meeting.
All right.
Study session. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Is there a motion to adjourn this meeting? Thank you. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. We are adjourned.